Hey guys, Funsho here from We Coach Crypto. Hope you're all doing well. And we are joined with a very special guest today. I'm really happy to introduce Natalie Brunell. How you doing, Natalie?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Now, Natalie is on Twitter as a blue tick influencer. She's been in the space for a long time. She is a massive advocate for Bitcoin, and she is going to be able to tell you all about her journey as she started and come through to where she is today. But she is literally a legend in the space and really for females that are out there. I want to salute you based on that because it's fantastic to see. I've been at Blockchain Live 2023 forum in Dubai today, and the amount of women and women that are CEOs of companies that are coming through is just fantastic. And that's something that we'll touch on. But yeah, your background and your journey with cryptocurrency, please tell us all about it.
Well, first of all, thank you. Those are very, very kind words. And I'm not sure if I'm worthy of all of them, but I am very passionate about Bitcoin. I come from a journalism background, but I think a couple of things planted the seed for me many years ago. First of all, I'm first generation immigrant to the United States. My family came to pursue the American dream. Their dream was to be in the middle class. And I just saw them work so, so hard in order to achieve that and to give my brother and I a better life here than the one that they had in Eastern Europe, where they grew up under communism. So, that idea of education and hard work was instilled in me at a very young age, and a little bit of skepticism and distrust toward the government because of what they went through. They finally were able to afford a house when I was in high school, which was really exciting because I remember us moving from this tiny apartment where my parents didn't even have a bedroom. They slept on the sofa. And we finally got a little townhouse, and my parents got a mortgage, and they were working really hard. And when I went off to college to study journalism, the financial crisis happened and they lost the house and they went under. So, just a couple of years into achieving sort of the American dream, they lost everything. And I watched them really struggle with that. And it affected, their marriage and their hope for the future and for retirement. And that really, really affected me. So, I started my career in journalism, I think, with a little bit of a frankly, frustration, right? Like, how could this happen? What's wrong with this system? Why does it feel rigged? And I wanted to hold powerful people accountable. So journalism was actually a really good field to go into because I really wanted to hold these public officials' feet to the fire and find out, why there was so much corruption and why the people at the top never seem to get in trouble for anything that they do, and they keep failing upwards and getting lifelong, job security, but people at the bottom were working harder and harder for less. So, I spent many years in journalism, interviewing people about everything, every walk of life, every background. People dealing with increasing costs of living, problems in education, crime. And I saw our country, the US, getting more and more divided and polarized and politicized. So, when I discovered Bitcoin in 2017, at first I dismissed it like so many people. I thought, oh, this is just like a stock. It could get hacked because it's digital. I don't trust it. And then I was fortunate enough to have a mentor who gave me the book, The Bitcoin Standard, which is on my shelf. And that really, really changed my path because I realized that there was really something here. And not only that, but I was very ignorant to the history of money, how our current financial system worked, why there was so much corruption, how money printing works, and what inflation really is. So that set me down a path, and here I am, a couple of years later. I'm doing this podcast that I'm really grateful for, and I'm hoping to teach people about not only Bitcoin, but about the current financial system, the problems in it, and how Bitcoin is this potential revolutionary solution.
I mean, that's an amazing story. I think a lot of people forget that it doesn't matter if you're an influencer, it doesn't matter if you're a celebrity. We're all human beings, and we've all been through our own journey. And that's it's a lot to deal with. At a young age. So for you to come to where you are today, and to have that empowerment and to know that you're helping people to achieve freedom, and fighting for something that you really are passionate about, it's in your heart, is fantastic. So I'd like to say that congratulations for that. In
Thank
terms,
you.
you're very welcome. In terms of women in blockchain, women in cryptocurrency, this has become a big talking point, and I love it. There's a lot of people that I've spoken to and that I've had on the shows, and I'd love to know from your respect, how much growth you think that we're seeing here from that side of things, but also what advice you'd give to other women that would like to get involved in this industry sector, because I think it's so important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It is very important, and I would love to see more representation and sort of more of a, 50-50 mix. I go to a lot of conferences where I feel like it's a a sea of men and then a couple of women, and I really am trying to connect with other women in the space just because I love the sense of community that women are passionate about, and we love to help each other grow, and we want to be represented in this financial revolution. So I'm always super excited whenever I see, strong female voices. I try to feature them in my show as much as possible. In fact, in the last 5 episodes, 4 of them have been, amazing women. So I'm really passionate about that. And I just encourage women to get involved. This Bitcoin is for everyone. It doesn't matter your age, your background, your race, your ethnicity, your language. It is for everyone. And right now, because Bitcoin is sort of entrenched in this industry of tech and finance. That's primarily male dominated. And so I'm not surprised that the numbers right now outweigh us, but that's changing at the same time. Every event that I go to, I do see more women. I love to connect with them. I try to host, like at the Miami conference, for example, last year, I did a brunch just for women for us to connect and find each other. Some of them were passionate Bitcoiners and some of them were the partners of passionate Bitcoiners who are trying to learn and get into it. And that's always really fun. So, for me, I have to say, I'm very proud to be a woman. I want to be, I'm happy to be considered a woman in Bitcoin, and I'd love to connect with other women. And at the same time, I recognize that it doesn't matter, again, who you are and what your background is and what you look like, and Bitcoin is for everyone. So I hope more women get involved. I think we need a seat at the table. And I'm inspired also by stories of women around the world who previously did not have access to, say, a bank account. And Bitcoin really does provide them with that accessibility and that financial freedom and sovereignty for the very first time. And those stories I want to uplift as well. So yeah, in the future, I hope that everyone's a Bitcoiner.
I love that. And I think that's a really important point to touch upon as well, because I've watched it myself. I mean, I've been in the space for like 6 years and I've seen that growth. And what's amazing for me are the people that had to travel miles to get to their bank that now have a smartphone. They've been able to enable their own business. They've seen growth, they've seen success. That's what this is all about. Our forte as We Coach Crypto is we want to help 1 million people understand cryptocurrency. And that's why we do these kind of things and bring people like yourself onto the show. So, we can keep that going and keep that conversation going. I think it's really important. Now, moving on to the markets, the dreaded conversation of where we are with the markets, how Bitcoin's performing, market cycles. What's your stance on kind of where we're at the moment and what your expectation is moving forward, sort of in a, say mid to long term outlook?
Sure. So this is obviously a very interesting cycle because just 2 years ago, we had an unprecedented monetary intervention by the government, and they printed, I believe it was about 40% of the supply of dollars. And so I think that we're coming down from this sugar high, and there's going to be a lot of volatility. Why? For many reasons. I mean, first of all, Bitcoin is still a very new asset class and technology network that's highly misunderstood. Not a lot of people fully understand Bitcoin and its potential and the network. And also just these macro factors. We are so indebted, and as they hike interest rates, it's very difficult for us to meet our obligations for a significant amount of time. And so as they tighten or sustain the tightening and high interest rates, our debt starts to catch up with us. And what's interesting is at this point, they have to come in eventually and print. And I think everybody sort of knows that, right? We've just have this inherent backstop, or implicit backstop, because the Federal Reserve always has stepped in. And I think the markets are just trying to figure out, what's going to happen next. What is going to be the thing that breaks the leg out from under the chair? And it's unfortunate because at this point, tax receipts are falling. Our deficit is growing. The U.S. Treasury just announced, more than $900 billion of borrowing in just Q1. That's up more than 300 billion than what they estimated at the end of last year. So really, this is all going to catch up with us very, very soon. And although we may have, good numbers in terms of employment right now, a lot of these are lagging indicators when they make these changes so aggressively. So there are a lot of headwinds ahead with regards to Bitcoin as well as other risk on assets. And I say risk on because most people associate Bitcoin with the big tech stocks and the risk on equities. So, this is going to be an interesting decade, I think, because commodities will outperform, in my opinion. I think Bitcoin will finally be recognized as the commodity, the energy-backed commodity money that it is. And I think that Bitcoin, as well as maybe precious metals, will be winners in this next cycle. I think there's been a secular shift from the growth to the value stocks as well. And so we'll see. But Bitcoin, I think, will experience more choppiness ahead. It is highly, it's still liquid. There's still a lot of money sloshing around in the system because when you come down from that big of a high, there's still money on the sidelines. And it's also a 24/7 market. And the price had a lot of pressure put on it on the downside because of the crypto meltdown and some of the crypto regulation that's happening. So we've got, forces from every angle, I think, hitting Bitcoin. But yet, look at it. I mean, it's still resilient. It is more than $24,000 to $23,000 per Bitcoin in a bear cycle in the middle of 132% debt to GDP. I think that's pretty impressive. And I think given the fact that next year in May we have a halving, that we will see, a boost in the price. But I don't really look at it in the short term. I look at this as that 5-10 year investment into my future because I want to be able to plan for my future in a form of money that they can't manipulate or inflate or confiscate. And so Bitcoin is the thing that I choose for my future planning.
I love that, Natalie, and you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
This is what I do. It's, the thing for me is the amount of people that I talk to, because they see some of the crazy gains that can happen very quickly in other projects that are out there, they can sometimes fail to understand that, if you look at this from a long-term perspective and understand what's going on in the economy and understand that there's this huge global recession and all the pressure, and yet, I remember Bitcoin at like $800,
Wow.
and look at it now. It's
Yeah.
like, it's insane. This for me is the future without question. But there's so much more that's branching out off the back of it. And I've been watching that infrastructure grow and all these companies come flying in, scrambling to, get a piece of this new technology, which is fantastic. And that brings me on to, what areas are you excited about where you think that there is potential growth? What sectors have you got your eye on?
I'm most excited about the growth on top of the Bitcoin network, especially Lightning, obviously, because I think that will empower transactions at, obviously lightning speed at low costs around the world. And I think that that's how the dollar is eventually going to move. And there are so many projects and companies that are using this bear market to really build projects that are inspiring and that provide more inclusivity for people in places like Africa and other developing countries and places where inflation is far, far worse than the CPI that they tell us it is in the United States. So I'm really watching the growth of those companies that will be onboarding millions and I believe eventually billions of people onto the Bitcoin network, and making the banks obsolete and making remittance payments, actually affordable, and doing away with these third parties like the Western unions that end up taking a giant cut when you're trying to send money cross border. So I'm really inspired by all of the things that are happening in the space. And just, if you watch my content, I'm really focused on the fundamentals and first principles that lead you to Bitcoin, which is questioning the money. There are so many, interesting things that are going on, whether it's in AI or the energy sector and different technologies that I'm sure we will all be discussing and using in the coming years. But we still have more than 7 billion people who don't have a form of money that they can trust and that they can rely on to have as a stable unit of account on the base layer of a global economy. And so I want to help people really understand money and what's broken, because especially here in the US, I think everybody has this sense that something's broken, something's rigged, something's unfair, but they don't really know why. And I think a lot of people point fingers at the wrong thing and they get very political. And I really hope that this is a form of technology that can actually unite us in many ways, because we all agree that the people should have the power and not a small class of ruling elites who do whatever they want at the expense of everybody else, right? So I think this is something that can really bring us together. And so I'm really watching Bitcoin adoption just on the base layer, as well as the exciting projects happening with Lightning.
I love that. Yeah, people forget sometimes about the key fundamentals. And look, I know how tribal it is in the space. I've been in many a clubhouse room and had conversations, and it's a good thing, because one thing I love about the community within cryptocurrency is there's this massive form of togetherness, and we're all sort of in it together to progress and make humanity better, which is important. And people sometimes forget the amount of time that is required for adoption to kick in with new technology. And I think that's the phase that we are maybe not even halfway through yet. It takes time. Some of the things that we speak about, and you start getting on a more granular level and technical about it because we are so passionate about it. But there's a person that's walking down the road that's heard of Bitcoin, but they've got no clue how it works. They don't understand how money works. That financial literacy, I think educating on that basis with digital, money like Bitcoin is so important. So if you were to try to do that in its simplest form, for people that are watching that might not be as technical, how would you put it across to explain what the difference is between paper fiat and Bitcoin, and why Bitcoin is better?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you just said, because I've been talking a lot on my shows and on my social channels about this idea of printing money, right? And that there's no cost to it in our current system, which I think is the biggest problem. They can create so much debt and they don't have a long-term plan for how we can pay it off and how we can become productive again. But there's no consequence. You can just literally hit a button and create all this money out of thin air, which dilutes the value of everybody's individual units. And so inflation hasn't just been a problem since the pandemic. It's actually been a problem for decades, especially after we detached the dollar from the gold standard. We detached the global reserve currency from something that was stable and something that couldn't be just inflated by politicians on a whim. And so that, I think, is one of the most important elements, because I remember posting a story recently, I think it was on Instagram, about how essentially money is created out of thin air. And I had someone who I've known for a very long time, who works in finance, who's very, very successful, write to me very upset, because he said, banks don't create money out of thin air. Every single loan is backed by deposits in the bank. And I had to read what he wrote to me several times, because this is someone who went to great schools, who has a good education, and who thinks that every dollar that a bank hands out is backed by the same amount of dollars in the bank. I mean, this is where we're at, right? So people don't know that fractional reserve banking and the fact that the majority of banks are actually insolvent. Good thing we don't have bank runs because they would be insolvent. So I think
Exactly.
that the most important thing, the thing that boils down to is live in a current system where there's no cost to creating money. And every time they create more, we go further into debt, we increase our interest expenses down the road, and it dilutes the purchasing power and the value of all of our money. And we have a new system, a parallel system that's peaceful and you can opt into it at any time, that is completely scarce. You can never print more of it. It is backed by encrypted energy. No one can ever confiscate it from you. No one can ever manipulate it. And we can rebuild a new economy based on something of actual value. And that's the difference. There's no cost to one, and it hurts everybody, especially the working class. And the other is one that is based on something that you can build on for abundance because you can rely on it. You can verify it. You don't have to trust anyone. So that's why I'm really excited about Bitcoin, because everything's going digital and we're moving in this direction no matter what. And so why wouldn't you want to transact in something that there's only going to be 21 million, and that there is no CEO, there's no politician, there's no political party, there's no country, you don't have to worry about any of that. And I think that that's so exciting, and it empowers our freedom as people to be able to transact and exchange goods and services like an economy should function.
Agreed. And that was very eloquently put. I like it. Yeah, it's so tricky because some of the conversations that I have with people, it just goes straight over their head, even when you're trying to dumb it down, because we've been brought up generation after generation interacting with this monetary system, and it's just not even in most people's heads
Yes.
to think a different way, to
Yes.
do that research, to go out there and say, okay, why is this not working the way that it should? Why
Mhm.
is this dollar that I'm spending now losing value? There's a lot
Yeah.
of lessons that need to be taught, for
I,
sure.
I completely agree. And I've heard several people in the space compare this to an analogy where a fish, if you asked a fish to describe its surroundings, the last thing that it would describe is the water, because it's just, you're so familiar, you're just swimming around in it and you don't even recognize it, right? It's how we take air for granted. But the second that the fish starts to realize that the water is going away, right? The water's drying up, or let's say we're losing oxygen in the room, you start to notice, because it is the thing that you most rely on. And that's what we forget, is the money is the water that we swim in. It is the air that we breathe. It is the blood in the economic body of our lives. And so when it starts to be corrupted and there are very few people who are in control, and the money starts to pool with a small portion of the pie, you can see why people start to realize that there needs to be a change. And what's unfortunate is so many people, again, they think that one, politician or another is going to save the day. But the fact is that the system's so rotten at its core that it has to be maintained through what? Creating more debt. So we're either heading toward hyperinflation and continually debasing the value of the currency that's backed by nothing, or we allow for some massive seismic deflationary bust, which would be far worse than what people experienced in the Great Depression. And nobody wants that, right? So politicians always choose the former. And thank goodness that we have something like Bitcoin, because what are the elites proposing as a solution? Becoming their slaves for the next few decades while, technology takes over our lives and they surveil us and tell us what we can eat and what we could teach in schools. I mean, this is really, I think, in the long run, the fight for freedom and the fight for the individual and our progress. And so it emboldens me to really be on this mission and learn as much as I can. I'm always on this constant learning journey, even where I'm at. I'm like, oh, I need to keep learning and studying. But I hope to share that with other people, because if people just understand that it's the money and they can potentially fix it, that's all we need. That's really empowering for us as a world.
I agree. I could speak to you about this all day. Believe me, I love it. Honestly, it's like the things that you're talking about. For me personally, what's being proposed here when we start talking about CBDCs.
Mhm,
Now, the whole transition to digital and
mhm.
everything's faster, everything's easier to access. All of that side of it's great. But what I'd love to cover just briefly is what a world could look like if CBDCs are everywhere and the mass majority that, let's be honest, don't understand the financial system
Right.
go along with that too, because that's what scares me the most. Honestly, that's why I'm on this mission to educate as many people as I can
Yeah.
about cryptocurrency. It scares me to death what CBDCs could do. But what's your take on those?
Yeah, very much so. I'm with you. I am very worried about a world of CBDCs, and I hope that people really educate themselves. And what it means is essentially a digital dictatorship. It is the government staring over your shoulder when you make any purchase, when you move any amount of money, and deciding essentially whether they're going to incentivize it or penalize it. And so if you want to, in the future, purchase something that they decide maybe doesn't contribute to the society that they envision. Maybe they think that something you're doing is bad for the environment or doesn't support the organizations that elected them. Well, then they could prevent you from using your money or program it so that your money expires or that you can't use it in certain places. I mean, this is a very dystopian world. And so we need technologies like Bitcoin really more than ever because we don't want to live in a surveillance state where someone is telling us what to do. And one of the things I urge people to do is to listen to, folks that are dissidents from countries where they had absolutely no freedom. I mean, there are some fascinating ones from North Korea who have escaped and spoken out, where literally the government taught them that they don't even have the word love. They weren't able, they were untaught the word love. They don't have it in their language because there is no love of another person. There's only love for the state and love for the slave master that is controlling you. And I think sometimes we take for granted that little steps and little crumbs they make up the whole loaf and they lead you down a path where all of a sudden you could have one freedom eroded and another freedom and another, and suddenly you're in chains. And that's what I don't want to see happen. We really need to take the power back as individuals because the government has no business in a lot of the activities that they're trying to control. They have no business in private, enterprise. They have no business in education. They have no business in teaching what's right and wrong to your children. That's the responsibility of you and your family and your small community that you hopefully will, help to grow in a way that's based on values and virtues. I think we're moving away from a lot of that because people feel sort of a lack of control, right? When you feel like you're working so hard and you can never catch up, what is it all worth, right? You get frustrated. You feel like you have no control. And then you might resort to behavior that's not moral, that's not based on values and not based on virtues, but rather go towards the vices that are an outlet for some of the frustrations
Mm.
that you feel. And the state is kind of taking the role of the mother and the father and the leader of communities. And I think that's very wrong. I think that, this country, the US was built on freedom of the individual, sovereignty of the individual, and frankly, sovereignty of the states, because we're moving away from that as well. It's like everything has been federalized and the power concentrates into the nucleus of Washington, D.C. and of these other central banks and of these other, governments around the world. And we need to be worried about that. And a central bank digital currency will be money that they control, money that they program, money that they can give to you, money that they can take away, money that they can censor, money that they can track and surveil. And we don't want to live in a world like that. And luckily, we have a technology we can rely on that is the antithesis of the CBDC.
100%. And I would urge anyone that's tuning in and watching this as well, if you really want to learn more about Bitcoin, go and read the Bitcoin white paper because it gives you a good understanding. Everyone has to dive down that rabbit hole at some point, and you've got a choice. You can either learn and understand exactly how something works, or you can just accept how things are going to be. But you've got to understand where the responsibility comes in for you as an individual and the rest of humanity, and also our children and their children and their children's children. You know, what kind of future do you want to build? That's something that you've really got to ask yourself. And it's part of the reason why, you know, I can speak for myself here. I do what I do. And I'm sure that there's an element of that for you too, Natalie.
Mhm. I am so grateful that I learned about Bitcoin, and it's funny because I think all of us, no matter where we are in the rabbit hole, we're like, "Oh, I was too late. I wish I knew about it sooner." And yet when you zoom out, we are still so far ahead of billions of people, literally billions of people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's a journey that we're all on together, I think. And the more that I'm in this space, I think it brings out the best in us. I've never been in a community where people are so focused on knowledge, on value, on morality, on restructuring something that's more fair, that's more accessible. I mean,
Mm.
the world won't have an equal outcome, right? I mean, life is a competition, biology is a competition. But the rules should be fair, right? I mean, who would watch a football game if they knew that the rules were all rigged and one team was going to win no matter what? I mean, what would the point be of watching the game, right? And that's what's happening right now is the rules are rigged and we know who's going to win. The bureaucrats always win because they make the rules and they can change them at any point. And so we now have a chance to rebuild and flip that power. Flip it, reverse the wealth transfer that happened for so many decades, bring it back to the people. And I think that that's so important. And it's such a great mission to be a part of. And I know it's going to attract a lot of people because a lot of us, no matter how different we all seem and no matter how the media portrays it, and I used to work in the media, so I know how the sausage is made. I think we are all more similar than we give and that the media gives us credit for. I think a
Mm.
lot of us have these universal feelings of, you know, wanting to connect, wanting the future to be better, wanting to work for something bigger than ourselves, wanting to be of service, wanting to provide for our families. That's I know very few people that don't want that. So I have a lot of hope in Bitcoin.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Natalie, I would like to thank you for coming on today. It's been a pleasure. I would definitely like to bring you on again and cover some other topics. But what I would like you to do for me is just let everybody know how they can follow you, because Natalie's brilliant on Twitter. She is featured online all the time, and you should definitely be following her. And you know, check out her website as well. Natalie, tell people how they can get in contact with you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. My Twitter handle is at Nat Brunell. I have a website, talkingbitcoin.com, that links to my shows and you can reach out to me. I have a podcast called Coin Stories, which you can get on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. And I also do a show on hard money where I'm traveling the world and covering Bitcoin adoption for that show as well. And those videos are posted on Twitter.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Natalie. Pleasure to have you on. Wealth of knowledge, and
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to catching up with you again. And guys, if you've got any comments, please leave them in the comments section. I'll make sure that all of the links for Natalie are left there in the description as well if you want to go and check them out. And
Thanks.
I look forward to catching up with you guys in the next video. Thanks a lot, Natalie. Brilliant having you on.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.